So I bought a Seadoo HX 1996 717 and it's time to tell you why I bought it and to get into the restore. So guys, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button and let's get into the video. Since day one of starting Classic Jetskis, everyone shouted two Seadoo model names to me. The first was the iconic X4. So of course, we tracked down a mint X4. Yes, before all the keyboard warriors go, it's the 717, we will find the 787, but this is about as mint as you're ever gonna see. We're still trying to find a 787, and I would really like the 1999. I know everyone says the 96, which is cool, but I do love the 99. If you want to learn more about why we bought the 717, then watch all of these videos here. Made a whole series, but today, the second model you all shouted at me was the HX. The HX, alongside the X4 XP, was one of the most iconic, beloved Seadoos they ever made. It had a real cult following and was a very dominant race machine. It was revolutionary for its time with its suspension seat and lean-in style hull. It went head-to-head with the B1, another iconic machine, and some say the HX was better. So I obviously had to have one. For me, the Classic Jetskis collection is all about having the most iconic machines from the 90s. Now we're getting close, and the HX is a vital piece of our collection. The other reason we needed a HX in our collection is the HX is the OG. It was the inception of the suspension seat, and it actually carried on into our beloved Parabolic V. There's a bit of a size difference. You can see this is like the smaller brother, but it's super cool to have both of them next to each other because this is the beginning of the cycle and this is right at the end. 2004 was the last year that they actually made the DI, so it's quite cool to have both of them in my collection. The issue is, with 30 years removed, the HX is bloody hard to find. Most were modded, raced and abused. I've been looking for the last 4 years and nothing really comes up. Then one evening when I was looking through eBay, Gumtree, Facebook, what I do quite a lot, I came across this HX. What drew me to this HX, beside the annoying missing OEM decals, why do people do that? Because at a glance, it looked pretty original and cosmetically clean. The seat looked good, the bumpers look good, the foot matting looked good, all original and OEM, which is super rare. Most people rip the foot matting off and put HydroTurf on, they change the seats and the bumpers are all marked up. So those little things are super hard to find and ours are all original. Now anyone that knows the HX knows that the way that they were rode back in the day was quite aggressive and the print on the side of the seat would always rub away. Now ours is still present. Yes, it needs to be touched in, but it's a good starting point to restore and a good indicator that the ski is pretty original. On top of that, the foot matting. When you see the original foot matting, it had HX duplicated and embossed throughout the whole pattern. This is such a cool OEM detail. Yes, people will always moan and say, you should go to aftermarket foot mats because they're better grip. Well, I want original. So the fact that we have every single panel intact, there's a few areas where the corners are peeling up a little bit, but by the time I've cleaned them up, they're going to look absolutely factory. And the holy grail when it comes to HXs, these are always removed or damaged and both sides are all original, not ripped. And this is a staple part of the way you ride the HX. You push your knees into it and you really lean into the corners. Original OEM handlebars, most of the time when people race these, they change them to aftermarket bars. Original OEM grips, yes, black. They should actually be pink, magenta, I believe. So that's something I'll have my work cut out to find. But I was pretty satisfied that it had not been messed with too much. The overall condition of the gel coat was actually really good. No obvious scratches or chips or marks, which is really, really good. It just needed a good mop and polish. Ugh. And then the underside hole, the bit that everyone forgets and doesn't ever put their head underneath, is going to need some love and TLC. It's definitely going to need to be gel coat repaired. I don't think the gouges are deep enough for fiberglass repairs. The hardest bit is obviously colour matching, getting this nice punchy yellow back, so that's going to need a complete overhaul. It's the worst hole I've ever personally had, so it gives me an opportunity to learn and to obviously put this back. I do have one of my followers though that's actually done this. I'm excited to see how he's done it and maybe I'll get some tips off of him. As anyone would know with the HX, the staple part of the look is the stunning graffiti style graphics that should flow over the hood on both sides, and ours was missing both. Some decals were present, most notably on the underside of the hull, but I knew I was going to have to track down someone with OEM decals to trace to make new ones. I knew from experience with my other classics that if you need OEM decals, you really are screwed because all of these decals are obsolete at this point, and the people that sell them online, not to throw too much shade, there's okay examples out there, but really the only way to do it, and I know this from my Seadoo SP 1990, is to get tracing paper and to manually trace every single detail. Now the reason you want to do it this way is to account for the undulation and the profiles of the ski. You then have to scan that in to your PC, you have to vectorize it all, you then have to painstakingly color match, working with a vinyl printer, and then get them reprinted and to lay them up. Now that process might seem easy, but it can typically take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and can be quite expensive to do the test to get the color match. Now, if you don't care about any of that stuff, now of course you can jump online. I think there's loads on Etsy and eBay, but I've had dealings with some of these people, and really they're looking to make a quick buck and they don't care about the accuracy. There is one good person in this industry in terms of graphics. Now I'm not going to name any names, and they do a better job, but they have actually admitted to me as well that they don't actually always make graphics from direct traces. Sometimes they make them from photos. So when you think about the HX missing such vital decals, I'd have my work cut out. I have zero reference to go by. Luckily, I have a very good follower and he's going to let me trace it. So later in this series, you'll see me tracing these decals, which is quite an exciting process because you really feel as if you're getting something original. Yes, there's a process to it, and luckily I'm a graphic designer by trade, so I know how to vectorize. When I say vectorize, that essentially means digitally redrawing the artwork. Now that process can take some time because some of these decals were super involved. They had like halftones and dots and squiggles and lines and all sorts of stuff going on. And then on the HX, it's actually different on both sides. The pump, ride plate and intake gate all look really good, and the trim even works, albeit manual trim. So I'm going to have to ride it like a peasant this time. I think this was the way they tried to reduce the price point on the HX back in the day. It's quite cool. I know a lot of people that actually have done the update to VTS. I think you drill a hole through there and you obviously have to have the VTS module, but it all works as it should. Now, of course, it's an absolute state. It needs to be stripped, sandblasted. And I think I'm going to powder coat this one because it's in a bit of a mess. Other areas I noticed was the OEM fuel knob. This is black and it is OEM. However, it should be magenta and pink to match the fuel cap and the grips. These little parts can be an absolute pain to find, so we're going to have our work cut out. For 1995 and 1996, the HX had magenta pink grips, and it really was a nice detail because it was a pop of colour. But what happened, and we all know this from the 90s, the Seadoo grips tended to degrade, so what people would do is they would search for the easiest part, in this case the black OEM grips, which didn't actually become obsolete until a lot later. So what you would see is a lot of HXs ending up with black grips because in 97, remember it ran for 3 years, it was actually black grips. But for me, although it's a pass because it's OEM, we need pink back. The pink should actually match with the fuel cap and the fuel knob. From past experience, from what I thought would be easy on the 1995, trying to find original OEM purple grips took 3 years. Luckily, one of my very kind followers found these. I haven't brought myself to take them out of the pack yet. My ones aren't too bad, but where I'm going with this is finding a pair of pink grips is probably going to be even harder because this ran across multiple years, whereas the pink was only on 2, I believe. Now, details like this, you might think, Joe, they're so small, but it is an OEM detail, so if it should be pink, it should be pink. Why did people change them? Well, again, the black fuel knobs were much easier to find because the part didn't become obsolete till a lot later again. So you'll find that when these got seized up, because behind this plastic part, you have a little metal valve, that would sometimes get really seized up and people would snap the plastic. As a result, they would just change it to a black, which is really annoying. And I think that these were made as an aftermarket part, or still made as an aftermarket part to this day. So you will always see parts get shifted out to black parts, which drives me insane. And I'll have to find a pink one. The engine, whilst needing, very heavy, a good bloody clean, looked very solid and all original. No parts have been changed, all OEM. Just needed a good going through. The guy told me he bought this HX to go fishing. Now that immediately gives you an insight to he either doesn't have a clue about what this machine is, or he was barefaced lying to me. Now he seemed like a genuine guy, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and think that he generally did buy it to go fishing. He went on to explain that it's been sat in his barn for 4 years. He tried to ride it back then, and he lost interest. He was quite honest and admitted that back then it ran okay, but because it's been sat for so long, it obviously needs fully going through and recommissioning. We're going to go obviously further than that because we're going to take the engine out and go from top to bottom. So we went to go see the guy. If you want to see that video in the purchase day, watch this video here where we captured it all. When we arrived and I started to walk around the ski, I was generally excited because all of the really hard bits to find were present. There were a few bits, but in general, I knew it was a really good starting point. That was before I opened the engine bay, of course. As soon as I opened the engine hatch, straight away I could tell that this poor engine would need a lot of work. Not necessarily mechanical work, but boy was it in a filthy state. As I said, the good news was it was all pretty OEM. As with the 1995, we were going to take the engine out. That was a given because I wanted to get it sprayed. But the first thing we wanted to do was to do a compression test. In tandem to this, I was looking for all the usual things. Was it all pretty OEM? In this case, it was. It had all the original OEM fuel tank in place. The pump hadn't been converted to premix, which I absolutely love. I know online people say convert to premix, it's easier, it's safer. But if you're an OEM guy like me, you've got to have the original pump in place. Yes, there was this annoyance where they put an aftermarket primer in and got rid of the OEM choke. That would just be a case of removing the aftermarket primer and putting the original OEM choke back in place. The carburetor would be fully rebuilt anyway, so that didn't stress me because normally with aftermarket primers, some of the components from the car are missing. Finding an OEM choke cable I knew would be a bit of a pain because these obscure parts sometimes are actually the parts that perish, so it's not as easy as just going and getting a new OEM cable. And the other little annoyance with the fact that he put a primer on is he'd actually drilled holes on the side of the ski and the mounting point within the engine. So that would obviously have to be gel coat and fiberglass repaired. The exhaust and water box were all still the original purple colour, so I could see that they hadn't been messed with. There was no pinholes on the exhaust, which is a typical issue where they need welding. The engine mounts felt solid and I could see the shims hadn't rusted. The engine base plate didn't have excessive amounts of rust. The one area I did notice that would need sorting to get it back to OEM was the spark plug grounding plate. One of the bolts had actually sheared off, so that would mean drilling out and reinstating the bolt to be able to put the plate back on. Obviously the plate was also missing, so I'd have to find that. So we then ran a compression test and I was pleasantly surprised for 150 psi per cylinder. Now for context, anything near 150 psi per cylinder is a good indicator of engine health. It's not an exact science, but it gives you a bit of reassurance. This would give you a good indicator of a strong motor and hopefully would mean we wouldn't incur the cost of a full rebuild. Typically when you run a compression test, you want to see a similar number, even if it's slightly lower than the original OEM stats. The indicator you're looking for is that you don't have 1 psi super low and then one say at 150. You want them to be somewhere near the same. Even if they're slightly lower than 150, you just want to make sure they're similar. In our case, they were, so this was a good indicator. We then tried to turn over the ski with the hope that we might get it started. We put a fresh battery on there and we put some fresh fuel in and oil, but as I suspected, it was all old grade fuel lines, so the likelihood of getting it going was very unlikely. I pulled the grey lines off, I took the airbox off, and we used a bit of engine start. Now I only advise using engine start if it's last resort to get the ski going. In this case, I wanted proof of concept that the ski would actually fire up. Once we sprayed a bit of engine start, it fired up instantly, yes, albeit for a couple of seconds, but this was an indicator that the ski would actually turn over. So we did a deal of £100 and I knew that once it had scrubbed up, the engine had been out and we'd done all of our magic with it, we'd be sitting on a really, really original clean ski. Yes, there was work to do, but at that price, we were super confident we were in for a winner. God, the hood's a lot heavier on this one than the parabolic. The reality is, guys, I always had the romantic idea of going to an old boy's house. That's always what I had in my head. He opens the garage door or a barn and he pulls out an absolutely perfect mint HX. But let's run that theory. The HX was a very acquired ski in terms of taste. It wasn't for everyone and it only ran for 3 years, unlike the iconic X4. With the XP, it ran really from 93 through to 99 in various different variations of engine. For the X4s, you have a much higher chance of getting your hands on an absolute barn find, whereas with the HXs, they were all raced and abused, and the ones that were kind of left original, they were snapped up a long time ago. It is basically 30 years removed at this point. So to find this example, in the UK, remember, in the US, they have a much bigger pool of skis. They always do, it drives me insane. This is a very good starting point. A few days after getting the HX home and digging through all the paperwork, a name came up that rang a bell, and it was Carl from the Jetski Hub. I followed him on Instagram, so I reached out, and he kind of confirmed. He vaguely remembers this exact HX. It's quite easy, because you can look at, obviously, the data tag numbers, but that's super cool, because it was a piece of the puzzle that I could start to slot together. If that wasn't cool enough, about 8 months later, after purchasing it, someone reached out on Facebook and said, "That's my ski." And first of all, I get that quite a bit, just because people want to claim skis that I find that are super clean. But it was actually legit. The guy sent me some messages over Facebook. His name was Jed, really nice guy, and he actually sent me photos of way back when it still had all of the decals on it. And he explains to me how he had 4 HXs over the years. I've continued to message him back and forth, and the plan, hopefully, fingers crossed, is to get Carl from Jetski Hub and to get Jed back on this once it's fully restored, just to see their reaction to a ski that's been fully restored and this many years removed. It's always an emotional one because people see something that they rode back in the day and it normally evokes really cool emotions. So hopefully I can get that for you guys. So I now had a full picture of the history of this ski. We had Carl, we had Jed, and then the guy I bought off, Tim. Now you guys might think, Joe, why does that even matter? I absolutely love when I can sort of trace back the history of a machine. Now all of my machines are pretty much one owner machines, so this is an exception. But because I've been looking for the last, it's at least 3 years, but it's probably more like 4. And I've just never seen one. I've seen loads in the US and Australia, but I knew that if I was going to get a HX, there would have to be a compromise. And the compromise here was it's fairly original. I can put my own stamp on it, and it will be a hell of a transformation for you guys. So you're now officially up to date as to why I bought a HX and the story behind it. What's next? Well, I've got lots of videos coming covering all the parts that I've managed to source for this restore, the work being done, obviously, and the bit that you all love, my first ever ride. And on this one is going to be special because a lot of people say the HX is hard to ride. So I see that as a challenge. Next episode, we'll be going through all of the parts that I found. It's a huge OEM haul, so you don't want to miss that, including an OEM new old stock cover for this HX. So it's going to be a good one. Guys, there's so many cool episodes coming. So obviously hit the subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss it. And as always, let's keep the classics alive.